Donald Trump has been indicted twice before, but this one is different. The former U.S. president has been charged with committing crimes that strike at the heart of U.S. democracy, of working to overturn the 2020 presidential election when he knew he had lost to Joe Biden. The indictment maps out Trump's efforts to steal the election, which culminated on January 6 of 2021 with a deadly storming of the Capitol building by a crowd of Trump supporters, while Congress was in the act of certifying the vote. The first count against Trump is for conspiracy to defraud the United States. It says the conspiracy tried to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election by using knowingly false claims of election fraud. The charge is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Now, the second count is for conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. That proceeding was the official certification by a joint session of Congress of Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election. This count is punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Count 3 is for obstruction of and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. This charge is closely related to number 2 and focuses directly on the act to obstruct that joint session of Congress certifying the election. Prosecutors have already used this law to charge hundreds of others who joined in the January 6th storming of the Capitol. The fourth and final count is for conspiracy against rights. It says that Trump conspired with others to suppress people's constitutional right to vote and to have their vote counted. It's punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Now, Trump himself has responded to the indictment on his Truth Social platform, saying it, quote, has awoken the world to the corruption, scandal, and failure that has taken place in the United States in the past 3 years, referring, of course, to the time since he reluctantly left office. There is a lot to unpack here, and we want to do that with Nick Ackerman. He's a legal expert and former Watergate prosecutor. Mr. Ackerman, it's very good to have you on the day. Now, 4 counts, 45 pages of indictment. Does the DOJ have a case against Donald Trump here?
Absolutely. You mentioned the crimes that are alleged, but over those 45 pages, it details all of the facts that underline those crimes. I mean, everything from him perpetrating the lie that he lost the election through fraud because dead people voted, because out-of-state people voted, et cetera, et cetera. And he used that lie, one, to try and get state legislators or state officials to try and reverse the vote in certain states. And the indictment goes through it state by state, each of the major battleground states. He used that lie to try and get state legislators to actually reverse the certification of the vote for Joe Biden in those states. He used the lie to get together a bunch of fake electors in each of these states that were sent to the National Archives and in turn to the Congress to have those counted instead of the legitimate ones. And he tried to get his vice president to basically step out of his official role of simply counting the votes and trying to get him, one, to accept the fake electors that were created by Trump and his cohorts. And if not to do that, to send the votes back to the state legislatures to have the whole matter redone.
He never admitted publicly, though, that we know of at this point, that he knew that these things he was saying were falsehoods, though. So how big a challenge will it be to prove that Trump's actions actually do amount to crimes?
Well, what they have are all of his underlings and people who were with him, his lawyers that were the White House counsel. They're going to testify against him. There's his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who it appears is going to be testifying against him. There are people, other staff people, such as Cassidy Hutchinson, who testified before the January 6th committee, that's going to testify against him. Basically, all of the testimony here is going to come from Trump's own employees and own people who are working with him in the White House at the time.
Some experts still argue that this is not the strongest case against Mr. Trump, though. Do you agree?
No, not at all. This is an extremely strong case. They've got him on tape in Georgia 3 or 4 times. They've got testimony by extremely reputable people that Trump called, such as Rusty Bowers in Arizona. They've got him saying things to various people, including the chairman of the Republican Party, to get her involved with this fake elector scheme. All roads lead back to Donald Trump. He's on tape. He's talked to other people. He's made public pronouncements about this fraud when, in fact, there's going to be testimony that immediately prior to making those statements, he was told by his minions that there was no such fraud. So the case here is pretty overwhelming.
Donald Trump's attorney appeared on NBC's Today Show and gave a few hints of the former president's legal strategy in defending against this indictment. John Lauro indicated that he objects to the speed at which this indictment is proceeding. Let's take a listen.
Would you like to see a speedy trial?
Well, the speedy trial right is the defendant's right,
Correct.
not the government's right. So we're entitled to understand what the charges are. We're entitled to do our own investigation. The bottom line is that they have 60 federal agents working on this, 60 lawyers, all kinds of government personnel, and we get this indictment and they want to go to trial in 90 days. Does that sound like justice to you?
Mr. Ackerman, do you think Trump's legal team will be able to delay the start of the trial?
I don't think so. I think that with the Speedy Trial Act, it requires an initial 90 days, but it may go beyond a couple months of that. I think that would be reasonable. But the fact remains that Trump's legal team knew about these allegations for a long time. It's not like there were 3 years that went by and all of a sudden they learned about this the other day for the first time. They knew this was coming. Donald Trump has spent some $40 million on lawyers over the past few years. They knew what the evidence would be. They heard what was before the January 6th committee. They're going to get entire discovery in this case, I guarantee you, within a week or two of his arraignment tomorrow. And the government's going to be ready to go to trial in 90 days. That is not unreasonable. The judge may push it forward a month or two, but the government made a very conscious, strategic decision here to indict only Donald Trump and not the other co-conspirators that are referenced in the indictment as unindicted co-conspirators.
Why is that?
They did this to simplify the case. They did it to simplify the case so the case could get to trial as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Unlike the classified documents case, there are no classified documents here to deal with. This is a much simpler case.
All right. What do you think? You say the evidence is overwhelming and that the DOJ has a really good case. What is the defense likely to lean on here then?
Well, it seems to me what he said, the same person, John Lauro, on CNN last night, basically was claiming that Donald Trump was just exercising his First Amendment right. That defense is not going to go very far. You can, if you lie, sure, the indictment says right up front, yeah, he could lie and say that he lost the election by fraud, but he went a step further and basically used that lie to undermine the democratic processes that are set up in our Constitution by creating these false electors, by trying to get the state legislatures to rescind the vote that Joe Biden received, trying to get his vice president to go outside of the Constitution and declare that all of these electoral votes in the battleground states should go back to the state legislatures. It wasn't just a matter of lying, but it was acting on those lies, which is a classic way that fraud claims are made, criminal fraud claims are made in the United States.
As legal expert Nick Ackerman, we appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let's take a closer look at the political implications of this latest indictment with Mark Fisher. He's a senior editor at The Washington Post and co-author of the book, Trump Revealed. Mr. Fisher, welcome back to DW. Now, what are the implications of this case for American democracy?
Well, it certainly has all the ingredients to be a trial of the century kind of event that dominates the popular culture, that dominates the political scene for quite some time. On the other hand, there's always a very important distinction to be made when it comes to Donald Trump between the legal and the political. This is going to be something that taps into Donald Trump's more than half-century history of battling back against legal threats to his business, to his career. And he's been very successful at that. He's been very successful at delaying. So I think it's quite reasonable to expect that he will be able to push this back deep into the campaign, if not beyond the campaign of 2024. In addition, there's an inherent conflict between his legal defense and his political defense. His political defense is going to be, they're coming after me, and when they come after me, they come after you. And he'll want to hit the prosecutors and the government back harder than they hit him. That's his instinct. Yeah. His legal defense will be very different. His legal defense, as the previous guest said, will be about free speech. And part of that free speech will be his freedom to say things that were wrong or that were lies. So that will run directly into conflict to his political response.
Yeah. In response to the indictment being unsealed, Mr. Trump posted on his social media platform that he has never had more support. And in a way, he's not entirely wrong, is he? He still is the front runner for the Republican nomination by a large margin. Is there anything in the indictment that could change that?
Well, probably not. Certainly among his hardcore supporters, each indictment seems to strengthen their belief that he's being wronged in this process and that the system is rigged against him. And so that hardcore support group is going to stay with him. What has changed is the attitudes of many independents and some Republicans who are essentially just exhausted by Trump. They're exhausted by the legal doings, the various ways in which he makes everything about himself. And so those people are looking for alternatives. And so we're going to see, we've already seen a drop-off in independent support for Trump. So the question is that enough to diminish his chances at getting the nomination? At this moment, he looks like he's in a strong position for the nomination, but a lot can change. There's still quite some months to go. And so then the question is the general election, where he'd get the nomination, and that's where I think he'd run into some trouble because there has been a significant measurable weakening of his position among those who are not the hardcore Trump base.
Yeah. Talking about GOP voters, though, in a recent poll, Donald Trump received 22% among them who believe who said that they would still vote for him if they knew that he committed serious federal crimes. So why does the electorate of what claims, or at least claimed up to some point, to be the party of law and order allow for their potential leaders to be above the law and not mind?
Well, they certainly don't see him as being above the law. They see him as being a victim of the law. And so the message that he and his minions will put out, they're already at it, is that he is being attacked by Democrats, that the criminal justice system is being usurped by Democrats to come after him, and that Trump derangement syndrome has taken effect across much of the American landscape. So that's an argument that is very appealing to people who feel like they've been left behind, people who feel like the system is against them. They see Trump as standing up for them against the elites. And this will only deepen that attachment that they have to him. And he's fully aware of that. He knows very well how to play that. What is not working for him is the attempt to appeal to the broad swath of independents and Republicans who like the way he went about his policies as president, but really are exhausted by his antics, by his showmanship, and by his untruths.
Mark Fisher of The Washington Post, always great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A lot to unpack, and for that, I'm pleased to welcome John Culhane. He's a distinguished professor at the Weiner University Delaware Law School. Mr. Culhane, welcome to DW. In your opinion, how strong is the DOJ's case against Donald Trump?
Well, first, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. The case is quite strong. Of course, it depends on the ability of the prosecutor to prove the allegations in the complaint. But to the extent those allegations can be proven, and there's plenty of evidence that's set forth in the indictment, it's a very strong case. One of the things I think needs to be emphasized here is that in addition to this idea of obstructing an official proceeding and trying to get the results changed, the most fundamental claim, in a way, is that through all of these actions, the former president was essentially trying to deprive people of the right to vote, or maybe more specifically, to have their vote counted. And so I think all of those things are quite serious, and there's quite a lot of evidence that's at least set forth in the indictment.
Yeah, and Trump has never publicly admitted, though, that he didn't believe what he was telling the American people to be true. So how decisive could this not so minor detail become?
That is a great question. So even if you can prove the acts, you also have to show that the president had the state of mind where he was he knew that what he was doing was in violation of law, and that can be sometimes more difficult than proving the acts. But in this case, it's not simply that he was exercising his First Amendment right to say these things, but that he was actually doing things, and this is what the prosecution will have to prove, that he was doing things that he knew to be in furtherance of, of false statements, that he knew or, knew that the statements were false, and that he intended to subvert the election. And you have to do that via circumstantial evidence. Almost always. It's very difficult to get into someone's brain. So you're using the cumulative acts to prove what you need to prove in this case. And I think they've got a very strong case here.
Yeah. And Trump currently faces 3 indictments in different jurisdictions. How could these cases influence each other's outcomes, you think?
Yeah, they're all quite different. I think, one is this kind of one-off state claim, which is based on the hush money payment to the alleged hush money payment to a porn star that was alleged to have been done in furtherance of his election. That one kind of stands separately. The 2 federal charges are also quite different from each other. One is about concealment of documents after he left the presidency, and this one is about all of the events, not limited to January 6th, that he allegedly used to keep himself in power. So they're quite different. The 4th indictment, which we strongly think is coming sometime this month, is from the state of Georgia. And that indictment, when it is filed, as we expect it to be, that will connect up more closely with this 3rd indictment, because the Georgia indictment is also about trying to influence public officials to change the vote. So I think those 2 indictments will have a lot to do with each other, and you might see the judges trying to work out the timing and how those indictments are going to relate to each other. But those are the 2 that are the most closely connected.
That was law professor John Colleen. We appreciate your input. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for having me.